Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to James Cameron.
I almost bailed on being a filmmaker. It's about sitting in that big dark room with all those other people you don't know, and something's gonna come up on that screen that's gonna take you somewhere.
I'm the king of the world! Oh boy, I'm very excited for today's episode. We have, if you recall, the Titanic Roundtable, which was a pretty early episode in James Cameron 101 history. He did make an appearance in that episode, and I described him as a very personable person. And he did promise me it would become a new book title. So at some point in his career, I expect to see a personable person pop up on a bestseller list somewhere. So let's welcome the author of Kindred Spirits, A Titanic Tale, Nelson Aspen.
And the future author of A Personable Person, a memoir.
First things first, how the heck is you're back in New York?
I am in New York after a whirlwind Southern California visit to spend the Titanic anniversary. We did a Titanic weekend aboard the Queen Mary in Long Beach, and then the actual anniversary of the Titanic, I was in Los Angeles, really just having a very good time. But I was surprised by the sort of the celebrity reaction to my little Titanic novel. I expected an enthusiastic and warm welcome at the Titanic convention, but I thought Beverly Hills might be a tougher nut to crack. I was happily surprised.
Amazing. Yeah, that was something I was very, very upset I could not attend, because that was the first one, right? That's the inaugural one.
For the Titanic weekend, it was actually the second Titanic weekend. But
it was
have no fear, there will always be a third and presumably a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, etc. But this is the beginning of my international book tour, because from Southern California, now I'm back in New York City. I have a couple of events in New York City, and then it's on to Boston, to the Titanic exhibition in Boston, followed by London, Belfast at the Titanic Hotel and Distillers right there at the museum in the Museum Mile. And then we're going to finish up with Baltimore, Hong Kong, and Sydney, Australia. So I am having a global year of Titanic.
Incredible. But hold on, go back to the thing real quick. Is it at least Paul Carganilla's first time doing the event?
Yes. As I understand it, Paul had been a guest at the first Titanic weekend, and he took it over because, when you're good at what you do, they enlist you to take things over. So Paul had a very smooth and organized and wonderful event this year, and we had a good time on the Queen Mary. And then from there, I headed out on on the rest of the book tour.
Amazing. But it was a good reception to the book, and I mean, obviously Alexandra was there as well. And
yeah, I mean, you sort of expect support from your friends, but
right.
Sometimes, within whether it's the Titanic community, a James Cameron community, or just whatever the genre is, things can get competitive, and people's I don't know, emotions can sometimes get the better of them. So, I figured, well, my book may not be everybody's cup of tea. It's a reincarnation historical fantasy skewed around the Titanic, based on my own metaphysical connections to a certain passenger. So, yeah, I realize that's not everybody's cup of tea, but I have to say I was really happily surprised at how warmly I was received. And of course, the main historian, although he would probably poo-poo it, but to those of us in the Titanic community, we consider Don Lynch to be the pinnacle of Titanic history keeping. So much so, in fact, that he was at Jim Cameron's right-hand side throughout the making of Titanic and Ghosts of the Abyss as the sort of unofficial and yet very official Titanic expert. And Don was at the Titanic weekend, so he was my primary source of insecurity, because I felt like, gosh, if I can win over Don Lynch to my book, I really will have had it made. And he was fully there, and he was right along for the ride during my presentation. We spent a couple of days together chatting. I got fun facts from him that I would never have dreamed, not only about Titanic, but about my personal favorite film of all time, The Poseidon Adventure. So he was giving me little factoids about that. Just real camaraderie, and the happiest review I could have asked for came in an email he sent to me afterwards, telling me that my presentation for Kindred Spirits, he said it was a very engaging presentation. So for me, that was like an Oscar.
Right, right. Have you had him on Titanic Talk?
We have.
Right,
He has
right.
been a guest, and he's just such a delightful man and so humble, and he really is the keeper of the Titanic flame. I remember, gosh, the book that so impressed that he did, the book that Don did with Ken Marshall, the artist, on Titanic, that really, I think it's fair to say, inspired Jim Cameron so much with his movie version, that he had Ken and Mr. Lynch right there with him throughout the movie making process. So, and they even played roles in Ghosts of the Abyss. They played Bruce Ismay and Thomas Andrews in Ghosts of the Abyss. So it's a real simpatico. So the first time I met the three of them, Don, and the only time I've met Ken and Jim, was at a Borders bookstore right after Ghosts of the Abyss had come out. And the three of them were there to promote the book version of the movie. And I was to be the master of ceremonies, introducing them to the audience and sort of leading a Q&A, which, if you know the three of them, requires no moderating. Just give them the microphone and let them go. But I was there ostensibly to be a master of ceremonies. And when we were in the little back room waiting for the event to start, I had my copy of the book and I had to get them to sign it. And I made the sort of big, daring confession to them that I believed I had a past life aboard the Titanic as an obscure sort of footnote in history, until now anyway, passenger named Milton Long. And you know what? These three guys, whether or not they believe in metaphysical, paranormal, or reincarnation, or anything, whatever you want to call it, they didn't blink. I think they have seen it all. They have heard it all, especially from the Titanic community. One of them, I don't remember which one, even signed the book to me, to Milton/Nelson, which was very generous. But yeah, I mean, you think about it, what they've seen in their Titanic years, nothing could surprise them.
So I had no clue you met James Cameron.
I did. I mean, it was a back little room at Borders Bookstore on La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles. What year was Ghost of the Abyss? 2009? Is that 2003?
2003.
Yeah, it was right after it came out. And
Wow.
I went to see Ghost of the Abyss. Of course, I was a tremendous fan of Titanic. And my good friend, Alexandra Boyd, you've heard the story. I helped her write her audition for James Cameron, because this was before the internet, really. In 1996, we didn't have internet. If we did, it was that. And she knew I knew all about the Titanic, just as a history buff. So I helped her with her audition. She got the part. We were all very excited. She had her story about her doing her time in Mexico on the set. So when Ghost of the Abyss came out, she and I went together to the Cineplex down on Lancashire in the Valley, and we were watching Ghost of the Abyss to see if there were any shots from the original Titanic. And sure enough, the one shot that is in the sequel, the unofficial sequel, is the shot of Alexandra, point of view Jack Dawson coming into the dining room, where Alexandra kind of gives him the once over and cocks her eyebrow. And we were screaming in the theater, because it's like, you made it into Ghost of the Abyss. We better call Screen Actors Guild and make sure you get your residuals. But yeah, so I think, if I'm not mistaken, she has the distinction of being the only clip from Titanic that's of a human, of an actor, in Ghosts of the Abyss. I haven't seen it in a long time, so I could be wrong, but I think I'm right.
Wow. So what is, before we get into talking about the history of how you wrote this book, and I am very curious about that. Obviously this is James Cameron 101. I want to know, I've heard so many meets with Cameron, what he's like, in your opinion, meeting him back, like kind of in a obscure place.
Yeah.
What do you recall Cameron being like?
Well, I spent 30 years as an entertainment reporter for various morning shows around the world. And so I had encountered him in red carpet situations,
Right.
although he never stopped to talk to me. I guess my outlets were never big enough for him to come over and talk to me. And also, I always say that the red carpets are red because of all the blood spilled by journalists competing to get in there. And I can be very loud and aggressive, but I'm not physically aggressive. And that is actually a big component to red carpet success, in addition to when you're holding your mic with your little flag around the mic. If it says something like Entertainment Tonight or CNN or, some really big outlet, they're much more likely to come over to you. So while I had encountered him on red carpets, the Borders bookstore was my only one-on-one encounter, so to speak. And I remember being struck by just really how normal it was. And I think probably a lot of that has to do with the fact that it was a bookstore, backstage at a bookstore. It was not a movie set. It was not a red carpet. It was not a film junket press situation. It was three guys who had a book, who were coming to talk to, there were maybe 24 people. I don't remember it being like some crowd of people at the bookstore being there to do it. It was just out of context for them, which probably was more enjoyable and didn't require a lot of fuss. There were no handlers around. There was none of that. It was three guys and a stack of books.
Wow. And now where is that book today that you had
You know what?
signed?
With almost every, I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I lived in LA for 22 years. I say you get less time for murder, but I did spend 22 years in LA before I finally got back here to where I belong in New York City. So consequently, to have a house, in Los Angeles, to shrink that down into an apartment-sized habitat, almost everything I had in Los Angeles anyway is in storage. Somewhere in Long Island in a storage bin are all those belongings. So when I die, if you survive me, you can have whatever books are out there. They're yours.
Okay. Whew, I was gonna say, I thought you said you sold it or.
I got in a very bad habit in the late 90s. As a kid, I was always a showbiz kid. I was a child actor, and so I was always in and around show business my whole life. And as a kid, growing up on the farm in Pennsylvania, I got my hands on some address book to the stars, and 90% of them were actually accurate addresses. And I would write to them and enclose a self-addressed stamped envelope requesting autographs. And I was the nerdiest kid in Westchester, Pennsylvania, because on my walls of my bedroom were autographed 8x10s, but not by the sitcom stars of the day, although that would have been cool. But I had Mae West and John Wayne and Rock Hudson and Olivia de Havilland. I mean, these were the autographs I was collecting. I was a classic film buff, and I made the mistake in the late 90s, once I did get internet, and discovered eBay. eBay. People want to buy your crap on eBay. It was a miracle to me. And I made the mistake. I sold off my entire autograph collection, one piece at a time. And I'm sure to the fan, and they went to Loving Homes because that's what eBay was at the time. But I do regret it now when I sort of feel like I want to pull out that Mae West that said Sin-Searly Mae West. And I remember Paul Lynde, who was like the funniest, groundbreaking gay guy of his generation. I don't know if you're old enough to remember who Paul Lynde was, but he was hilarious. He was best known as Uncle Arthur on Bewitched, but he was the center square on the Hollywood Squares game show for decades. And he was so funny, and he was out without ever saying it, but everybody knew, and he was hilariously funny. And he had sent me an autograph that said, "Love and Laughter, Paul Lynde." And made such an impression on little adolescent me that to this day, when I'm signing books or anything, cards, greeting cards, I more often than not, sign love and laughter, because what two greater things could you wish for someone?
Amazing. Amazing. Look, when I called you a personable person, that was half me trying to figure in the moment what to say, but also I think in hindsight, I don't know that I could have picked a better description for you, because you just are like this is my second time interacting with you one-on-one kind of thing, and I love the personality that you bring to your podcast. I watched the like panel that you did when you were on the Queen Mary, and the personable person that you were there. I mean, it's such a great way to describe you. And I love hearing, like if I were to give you this book right now, that's what you would probably write. Cause I agree.
I will definitely sign love and laughter to you, because that's what it's all about. It's very, very flattering of you to say. Before I left LA, they referred to me in the press releases as Hollywood's happiest personality.
Yeah.
And there's a little pressure when you're known for always being in a good mood and always smiling, and sometimes that can wear on you and be a burden you may not want to shoulder. But hey, that's a good. If you're going to have a reputation, that's a good one to have. You just suck it up. It's easier to be nice than to be miserable and try and fake it. Just be nice. It's easier.
Right. Absolutely. Although I have heard you, I'm pretty sure I've heard you say "fake it till you make it."
Well, I probably have. That sounds like something I would say. But there's that. I don't know. There's somewhere in my happy files, there's some anecdote about how it's easier to smile. It uses fewer muscles to smile than to frown. And that if you psychologically smile, you are more likely to get happy. So maybe there is something in fake it till you make it. Just put on a smile.
Right. Okay. So, I'm familiar with, and I'm sure many people that might be checking this out are familiar with, assuming they've listened to Titanic Talk. The history you and Alexandra have goes beyond, like way beyond Titanic, 1996 premiere in 1997, right? Like there's a whole history prior to that.
We figured it out. We met in 1989. So we have we're coming up on big decades of anniversaries coming up. She was a waitress at a restaurant where I was, and I cartoon things compulsively. My hands are always going. That's why you saw I've always got a pen in my hand. And because a live television, so many years of doing live television, you're constantly waiting to go on. So I was always doodling and whatever. But I was in a restaurant with some friends. Alexandra was our waitress. Of course, not surprisingly, she had a very colorful and dynamic personality. So I was cartooning her. And back in those days, they put crayons on the table as well with your paper tablecloths. So I was drawing Alexandra, and she had crazy red hair, and I was doing with a red crayon or orange with her hair. And at the end of the night, after we paid the tab, I presented her with the tablecloth, and she was very charming and wonderful. And she says, "I'm going to get off at such and such a time. Stick around, have a drink." I stuck around. I had a drink. That became, let's start doing Sunday dinners together, and a friendship was born. And I moved to LA first. She came to LA. She was only going to be there for a couple days. She ended up stuck there. She stayed with me. I rented a house. Then I bought a house. And when I was giving up my lease on the house, she moved into the house. So we actually lived in the same house. So not at the same time. But we've been having these parallel lives. And there were many years she moved back to London. I didn't see her. We didn't speak. And we just didn't speak. We were out of touch. And then her documentary, Ship of Dreams, came up. And she asked me to do commentary about how I helped her get on Titanic. Which I did. And then when the film came out, she asked me to help her with promotion, because I was able to get it in the press, stories of that. And I was like, you know what? The best promotion we could do would be to do a podcast. We always wanted a talk show. Now we can just do one. We live in a world where everybody can have a talk show. And that was over 55 episodes ago. And the people we have met, such as present company, has been extraordinary. What a gift through our little iPhone here.
All right, right. But I was going to say, so that history leads you to helping her craft her audition, get Titanic. That leads to Ghost of the Abyss. That leads to you meeting James Cameron. That leads to her crafting her own documentary, Ship of Dreams. Her reaching out to you. That's really the reignition. Does that spark the book, or is the book happening
Yes,
prior?
absolutely. Absolutely. The book would not exist had I not been doing the podcast. It is my 9th book. So, I'm kind of a machine. I learned that from Jackie Collins. If you want to circle back to my Jackie Collins story later, remind me. But
Okay.
yeah, I'm a machine. And I'm 2 novels into a trilogy called Dancing Between the Raindrops, which are a heightened version. It's a heightened autobiography. I've taken it up a notch for dramatic storytelling purposes. So 2 of those are out, and the 3rd, Dancing Between the Raindrops book, will come out next year. But in my chronic OCD writing style, I had come to realize, as we're promoting Alexandra's film and we're having so many guests who have books out or podcasts or websites or artifacts, everybody has their own Titanic thing. And I was like, well, wait a minute, where's my Titanic thing? I'm the one that's had a Titanic thing since I was 3 years old. I've had 61 years of Titanic, but what have I got to show for it? I need to have some kind of legacy, something I can touch. And so I wanted to tell my reincarnation story, because I touch on it in Actually, I don't just touch on it. I tell my reincarnation story in Alexandra's documentary. But I wanted to put it into book form and expand on it and tell everything, which includes, as you'll see in the book, if you haven't gotten there already, James Cameron's film is in the book. All the different experiences I had are in the book. But I had to fictionalize it for the book because my publisher said, the Dancing Between the Raindrops books are your story. And their period, we go through the 80s and the 90s and the aughts. He's like, I'd really like your next book to be contemporary 2025. So you can tell the reincarnation story of Milton Long, who died in 1912, but I want you to set it in the present day. So I had to, really the only fictional character in my book is me. I have turned myself, instead of being 61 years old in 2025, I'm 29, the same age that Milton was when he passed away. But the stories and the path that I traveled on to discover Milton is in Kindred Spirits. The one really good story I had to leave out because it wouldn't have made sense in a contemporary setting was in 1985 when I had an interaction with oceanographer Robert Ballard, who discovered the wreck of Titanic. And in 1985, I was 23 years old, and a total Titanic diehard. This was long before Cameron made his movie. In fact, I don't know that Cameron would have made his movie had Dr. Ballard not found the wreck. I mean, I think it's pretty common knowledge that James Cameron's primary interest in telling the Titanic story was because he wanted to go down to the wreck. He was interested in the oceanographic aspect of Titanic. That's what ignited him, right? So 1985, Dr. Ballard is the most famous man on the planet that week because the Titanic's location had never been known. Nobody knew where the wreck was. Dr. Ballard found it thanks to Jack Thayer's sketches. Aha, see, everything ties together. So, because Jack Thayer was the one eyewitness who said the ship broke apart. And a lot of people said, no, it did not. Jack Thayer was the one who made some very famous drawings of how he remembered the ship breaking apart. And it was the debris field from Jack Thayer's testimony of the ship breaking. Ballard was following the debris field, and that's what led him to the wreck. I digress. Dr. Ballard, super famous, cover of everything, 1985, and little Nelson Aspen, living in my little studio apartment in New York City, teaching aerobics or whatever I was doing to pay the bills at the time. I had to talk to Dr. Ballard. I had to find him. Somehow I had to find him. And I got out what we old folks called a phone book. You young whippersnappers don't know what a phone book is, but it's a big, thick book of phone numbers. And I was determined I was going to track down Dr. Ballard. Through 411, which is another reference kids today don't get. That was the information. You would dial 411 to ask a human being for help in finding phone numbers. So between the phone book and information, I got the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And by this time, I had pieced together who I was and who my connection was with. Milton Long. And the operator or the receptionist answers, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Now, keep in mind, most famous man in the world that week. And I said, hi, this is Nelson Aspen calling from New York City, and I'd like to talk to Dr. Ballard. Right. She goes, hold on, please. She puts me on hold. I don't know, 30 seconds, a minute later, he comes on the line and he goes, hello, Milton? And that was very great confirmation to me that I was not insane. And I've told Don Lynch this story, and he was very patient as he just sort of nodded knowingly, like, okay, Nelson. It was almost like he was saying, if you believe it, then it's true. So I had this very brief minute conversation with Dr. Ballard about, I want to be on the ship. I'll swab the decks. I'll cook the food in the galley. Just let me on that ship of yours to go out to the ocean. And a week later in my mailbox was an application to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute that he had arranged to send to me, which was very kind. But that was also a wake-up moment because I was like, hey, I don't really want to be an oceanographer. I think I'll stay on dry land and pursue my television career instead. Much more stable being in TV than oceanography. So yeah, but I have a great affection for Dr. Ballard for not only confirming my suspicion that I was Milton Long, but for being so kind and I just open to talking to an enthusiastic fan. We're everywhere now, but we weren't everywhere in 1985.
Wow. What a bizarre thing that more than likely, like, that's such a unique time capsule thing that you just described there that like you can't do that now, kind of deal. You know what I mean? Like social
now
media.
You'd be arrested for stalking.
Right.
You couldn't do that now. No.
Right. Like the closest thing is social media. You send them a message, you hope they see it, and more than likely they're not going to see it. But wow, like that's such a unique thing that you just described there. And
well,
I
I've
hadn't
always
heard
had
you.
balls. I have to say, you just have to strap some on and try things. I mean, what's the worst that could have happened? He wouldn't have taken my call. I mean, it's nothing ventured, nothing gained. Lee Grant, the actress Lee Grant. Lee Remick is long gone. Lee Grant is in her 90s and still with us. Lee Grant wrote an autobiography, and I believe, I'm close to it if I don't get it exactly right, Say Yes to Everything, or I Said Yes to Everything, something like that. And I think that's a good lesson. I mean, it doesn't mean you should take foolish risks, but yeah, give stuff a go. Why not? You got nothing to lose.
Not to go down a side tangent here, but that have you seen the great film with Jim Carrey, Yes Man?
Yeah.
That's what that reminds me of. You just describing that.
It's really, what could go wrong? I mean, especially when you're young, especially when you're 22 or 23. That's how I came up with the name for the autobiographical series, Dancing Between the Raindrops, because when I was in my 20s, living in New York City, running around, causing trouble, I mean, I was cute, and I had a big mullet, and I looked good in my Lycra. But I would come home and my parents would be like, they were so worried about me because I was really having too much fun. And my dad said to me, "You're dancing between the raindrops." And that stuck with me, that expression, because it really was how I lived my life. And I went running in the rain. I did a little 10K this morning after I got off the air, and I went for a run, and it was raining, but I never got wet. And I was thinking of my dad this morning, thinking, Dad, I'm still dancing between the raindrops.
What does it mean? What does dancing between the raindrops mean?
You're dancing, you're avoiding the raindrops. You're not getting wet. You're dancing between them. So you're taking, in my case, according to my father, I was taking foolish risks, and yet somehow I would always come out unscathed.
Okay.
And yeah, that's how I roll.
Hey, it's paid off. Clearly,
still going.
Paid off. So this is your 9th book.
Yes, it is. And you're supposed to love all your children equally, but I do have a tremendous affection for this one, not only because it's the most recent one, but it really is it's my Titanic book. There won't be another Titanic book. I've had little Titanic elements in other books, but this is my personal Titanic story. And Paul Carganilla, Alexandra, L.A. Reid Beatles, Don Lynch, they all pop up in the book because it is my Titanic experience. Greg DiNapoli, the wonderful artist whom I met through the Titanic community, did the cover for me. So it's kind of like a potluck dinner, my book, in many ways. If I hadn't met these people, I would have had my story, but it wouldn't have had those characters in there as well. So that's kind of a treat. And yeah, I feel very fondly about it, so much so because Milton comes, we start the book with Milton's demise, where he and Jack Thayer, whom you could argue had a deep affection that would have been inappropriate in Edwardian times, but they only knew each other so briefly, and then Jack survived and Milton did not. But in my fantasy version, Milton is pulled underneath the black waters, and the next chapter he opens his eyes and he's not in the water. He's in a gay nightclub with a man's mouth on his mouth, and he's wet, but he's not wet with cold North Atlantic seawater. He's wet with perspiration in this pulsating nightclub of modern Manhattan. And so begins the Odd Couple story, where you have two souls in one body. And that's, in a lot of ways, that is the story of a lot of gay men my age. You're dealing with our generation's repression, Milton, with modern freedoms. So in my book, they have this odd couple, these two very different souls who help each other, and they solve a mystery. It becomes a mystery that's all based on historical fact. They have to uncover the mystery of what happened to Milton's unrequited love, Jack Thayer. And Jack Thayer's ending, although he survived Titanic, was not a happy ending. A lot of Titanic survivors, especially men survivors, did not have happy endings. Between the survivor's guilt, between the post-traumatic stress, I mean, just to survive the tragedy did not ensure you good fortune or happiness. So they uncovered together historically, and by traveling to Milton's birthplace, Jack Thayer's birthplace, Ireland, etc., Titanic conventions, where they encounter some of the Titaniacs. They have screenings of all the major Titanic films, and they uncover the mystery. And in doing so, they help each other. Milton gets to express himself in ways he couldn't have in 1912, and Preston, which is Nelson, Preston grows up. He learns how to be a man.
Did you write this with a intention, or maybe that's not the right, a hope that at some point potentially this could become something other than a book?
Well, it's interesting because with the Raindrops books, they were very keen on getting me to do audio versions. And I just, when do I, that's a lot of work. And they're like, oh, well, then don't worry about it. We'll get AI. It'll take 1 second. We'll push a button and AI will do it. And I'm like, they're like, oh no, you can edit it. You can listen to the AI and correct things. And I'm like, if I'm going to go to all that trouble, I might as well record it myself. But it is a time disaster to record those books. So I have recorded the first Raindrops book. Ultimately, I would like to record Kindred Spirits as well. However, of course, because hey, I'm a Hollywood guy, so everything should be a movie, right? My first book of the 9 was the only one that was self-published because it was a screenplay I wanted to get sold. This was 1,000 years ago, and I thought some 20-year-old development genius who has a stack of screenplays this high on their desk is not going to look at my screenplay. But if it's in a book form, they'll think, oh, it's fancy schmancy, I'll read the book. You know, it'll be much more impressive to adapt from a book. So that was the story behind my very first book, which incidentally never got produced. So yes, and interestingly, maybe it's because I had the book launch in Beverly Hills at the Four Seasons Los Angeles with a bit of a, you know, notable famous faces coming through. Now, of course, there are people that are interested in developing kindred spirits. And I would point out that my Titanic story is not a James Cameron Titanic story. There will be, it is not a special effects blockbuster. I mean, obviously there will be scenes on the Titanic, but we don't have, this is not a multi-million-dollar extravaganza. This is a love story. It's a ghost story that just happens to take place on Titanic. And another thing I should point out, if you want to say a similarity to James Cameron's film, it always bothered me as a Titanic enthusiast prior to James Cameron's film that Jack and Rose were invented characters out of James's very fertile imagination. And with the vast amount of people who were on Titanic, why he didn't opt to tell, I mean, even if you would take liberties with the actual person, but why would you create fictional characters when you had such a rich field of real characters to choose from? And there are similarities in repression between Kate Winslet's character being, you know, squelched as a woman of her day, unhappy because she's a woman and she can't be her full self. And that's Milton's story. Milton, and from everything I've gathered, could have been, and I have all sorts of disclaimers. I'm not saying I know he was gay. I'm saying I know for a fact that he was lost and unhappy and running from things, dropping out of Harvard, dropping out of Columbia, traveling by himself. I mean, his death certificate says gentleman of leisure. That's no epitaph. That's not what you want to be remembered for. This was an unhappy dude. I hope, and here we are 113 years later saying his name. So, hey, at least I've done that for him.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's a similarity there. Milton is my Rose Dawson, Rose Decatur, blah, 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 Dawson.
Yeah.
DeWitt Decatur, is that right?
DeWitt Decatur, yeah.
DeWitt Decatur,
Yeah.
Supposedly from Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia. I don't ever remember running into a Decatur. But there you have it. I mean, repression is repression, and I've got a lot of sex in my book. My book is not for minors. There's a lot of graphic passion in my book. Another lesson from Jackie Collins. But somebody said to me, I was on some show. Oh, it was a local TV news show, and I had to enlighten them. I said, they were concerned about the sexual content of my book, and I said, hey, guess what? People had sex on the Titanic, and I'm not talking about the handprint on the car, and the cargo hold. I'm talking about people were having sex on the Titanic. I guarantee you, up until the last night, they were. People had sex then. People have sex now. So that's a real part of my story.
Amazing. Yeah. And I mean, there's no shortage of, I mean, you just look at like what the BBC puts out, like there's constant Titanic tales that are being produced.
Well, if I wanted to, and when I wrote the last page, I was like, okay, well, I'm saying goodbye to Milton now. Like I've resolved Milton. I'm letting Milton rest in peace. And I've grown up too, thanks to him. But I was sad that it was over. And I got to extend it a few months through the editing process with a really brilliant editor who is half my age. And I needed that. I needed to sort of bridge the generation gap. So he's like, you know, Nelson, you really, that sounds like a 61-year-old in 2025, and you're in this book, you're 30. So okay, so he was very helpful with that. And plus with the historical fantasy genre, that was a genre I hadn't tackled before, and there are very specific, as he explained to me and taught me, rules. If you're going to set up an imaginary universe, you have to very clearly define, I assume this must be very true in the Avatar films, you have to very clearly define what the rules of that universe are and then stick with them, because if you stray from that, you'll lose the audience. So he was very helpful with that, and I hated saying goodbye to them. But my point being, if I really wanted to go back, I could supposedly do a series of historical fantasies based on real Titanic passengers, because every day, thanks to the internet, we learn about a passenger we didn't know about before. And that's the magic. It's really bottomless.
It is. It is. Who would you not who would you want to direct? Who would you want to be you? Who would you want to be you?
It's funny because my editor said to me, he's like, I told him, I'm going on this James Cameron podcast today. He's like, you're talking to James Cameron? And I'm like, no, I said, no. Not that I know of, unless he pops in as a surprise. But he's like, you should get him the book. And I said, quite frankly, I'll bet you the last thing Jim Cameron wants is another Titanic book. I mean, he was very obliging after Ghost of the Abyss with the Titanic documentaries, and in that way, I mean, he realizes that he has a responsibility now to the Titanic community, and he's very respectful about that. But I don't think he would want another Titanic project. But if anybody's interested in that, before we sign a development deal, I encourage you, read the book and get in touch before we sign a deal, because I think it is going to happen this year.
Incredible. But who would you want to play you?
Well, that's just the thing. I was having a conversation with this because I retired from my showbiz career and I'm now a political commentator. So I haven't been keeping up with, it used to be, I'd say nobody sees more bad movies than I do, because I was interviewing celebrities 2, 3, 4 days a week. And I would have to see their films or television shows before the interviews so that I knew what I was talking about, obviously. But that also meant that I saw a lot of crap. Only around Oscar time did you ever start to see the really good stuff. So when I retired from my daily grind of TV reporting, I really have gone on a unintentional fast. I'm catching up with, I'll catch up with Hacks, or I was watching Julia, the series Julia on HBO, which was only on for 2 seasons, but I'm enjoying it. So I just sort of catch up recreationally the way other old folks do. So I'm not up on who the young stars are, but Milton and Preston are 29 years old. And other than Timothée Chalamet, I'm not sure I can name who the hot 29-year-olds are. So, I leave that to whoever's going to cough up the money to produce it. They can cast it. I'll just enjoy it. I don't even want to write the screenplay. My work here is done. I want to sit back and enjoy people still talking about Milton. That gives me joy. I feel like I've sort of rescued this obscure fellow. Jack Thayer got all the attention. Oh, so in Titanic, when the iceberg hits, the ship hit the iceberg. So when they collide and the ice scatters all over the deck, you see the 2 young men playing with the ice.
Yeah, one throws them the thing.
In my mind,
that's who that is.
Probably in Jim Cameron's mind, because he knew all he knew who everybody was. That was Jack and Milton to me, and I kept waiting for them to say it. I kept waiting for some reference. Of course, you couldn't say Jack because DiCaprio's character was named Jack.
Yeah.
So they couldn't have 2 Jacks. although I think every third person in 1912 was nicknamed Jack. But yeah, so I mean, that was my little mind. I think the way to go for Kindred Spirits is that you get young talent, unknown talent, make them into stars with this project, and you get some venerable, great, Molly, of course, you can't have a Titanic story without Molly Brown passing through at some point. But I take a lot of the lesser known Titanic figures, like the gym instructor, the perfume salesman from Germany, whose perfumes were found at the wreck. He survived, actually. And there were two older gentlemen who were rumored to be lovers, Archibald Butt and Francis Millet. So there are all these peripheral characters of Titanic history. And I think those would be the fun star roles, because you could have someone like a Susan Sarandon just come in for a day and play Molly Brown, just get her scenes down, something like that. That would be fun and kind of a wink to the Titanic community, and still be able to focus on what is a love story, ghost story, a time traveling affair.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Good. Leave it. Honestly, yeah, that's probably the better way to go. It's cheaper. And you're giving somebody like a potential break. You know what I mean? In terms of Timothy doesn't need any more work.
That's right. Let's get some new talent in there. You and I can make cameos. I think all of us in the Titanic community will all, I guess we'll need some extras as the Titanic's sinking. We can all sort of mill around the deck together.
Yeah. Yeah. Get Brittany Butler, Ethan, get them all. Get them all. And going to your point, because I do want to make sure we cover this really quickly. Cameron creating Jack and Rose versus how you said, why not just pull from a very rich, real history? And, I guess obviously I don't know. Maybe he's explained why. I can't think why, but maybe because in the 90s, right, we were still living in a time in the 90s where you had kind of direct descendants that could still, right, like there was still that potential of, if you chose somebody to portray them and take liberties, it potentially could offend or could seem like distasteful. Or
I will agree with you on that. Although that's why they always say you see on everything, any resemblance between this person living or
right.
is purely coincidental or fiction. But I would contend that Officer Murdoch taking his life, when he has direct descendants still living, that's true. That would go against your theory.
That's true. Yep.
And Captain Smith, for that matter. There's a new book out now. We're having the gentleman on Titanic Talk. There's a new book, Discovered Letters from Captain Smith's Daughter. I think I've ordered the book. It's on its way to me now. But Captain Smith's ending is always in dispute. There are stories of that he was seen being washed over the ship with the bullhorn, not a bullhorn, what do you call those, megaphone kind of things, shouting, "Be British, be British." And some other eyewitness said he was in the water holding a baby up out of the water. Of course, James Cameron sort of made him look a little dazed and confused and stand on the bridge till the end. So, we'll never know. And I appreciate that James Cameron probably wanted control over his characters, and he wanted to write a Romeo and Juliet story. So he had to invent them so that he could make it just the way he wanted.
Right. Right. Yeah, no. And I think he has kind of, in post Titanic, I think he has come to the realization that Murdoch maybe portraying him that way, doing it that way, was definitely not the way he should have gone about doing that. That seems like something that I remember hearing Cameron saying, maybe I should have done something differently there.
You're never going to please. I mean, you're never going to please everybody, no matter what you're doing, writing a book, having a dinner party, making a film. It doesn't matter. You're never going to please everybody. So really, at the end of the day, you have to please yourself and hope you please a majority of people. And you cannot take the negative criticism to heart, because it's counterproductive, and that goes for all aspects of life. But he made a beautiful film that rejuvenated Titanic interest. And I talk about this a lot, about how every generation since the tragedy has seen something reignite the spark for the next generation. Why else can you explain why children are interested in the Titanic? What is a 10-year-old in 2025? Why would they be interested in something that happened in 1912? And if you think about it, Dorothy Gibson, who was the silent film actress who survived Titanic, she was the first one.
She made the first one. Yeah,
yeah. She was the first. She ran right out wearing the clothes she was rescued in. Oh,
Yep.
I'm going to save these. She knew what she was. That was before eBay, but she knew what she was doing. She's like, I'm going to make a movie wearing the clothes I wore from being rescued. So there was that. Then, I mean, and then more films.
And that's lost media, correct? Like no one we don't know where that is.
I think there may be some stills, some production stills, but not the film itself. And there have been over a dozen films, German propaganda films, all sorts of different dramatizations. But when Walter Lord wrote his book, A Night to Remember, which was based on survivor testimony to the author, Mr. Lord. The book, it was a bestseller. The book rejuvenated Titanic interest. Then they made a movie in 1958 of A Night to Remember, which interestingly made Officer Lightoller was the real hero of that version, but that reignited it. For me, it was the Poseidon Adventure. I mean, Irwin Allen, who produced the Poseidon Adventure, obviously was interested. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm 99% positive that Irwin Allen loved the Titanic story because all of his disaster films were sort of an homage to that. None more so than Poseidon Adventure, and I have the tattoo on my leg to show you how devoted I am to the Poseidon Adventure. And for me, that kickstarted my interest in Titanic. Luxury liner, disaster at sea. Poseidon led me to Titanic. Then Dr. Ballard's discovery in '85, that launched a whole new generation of interest, including, I contend, as I said earlier, James Cameron. And then James Cameron's film really locked it in because it's on television every 5 minutes. You can't escape it. So, and I don't know about you, but even now, as jaded as I am of a Titaniac, if it comes on, if I'm flipping by a station and it's on, it doesn't matter what part it is in the film, I'm hooked and I stay through at least till the sinking.
Of course, yeah. And whenever it's re-released, I'm there day one. It was just a couple years ago, right? For the 25th, they re-released it. I was there. I do think that's going to be the one that's going to carry it for quite some time until eventually they decide to remake the Cameron film.
Well, I hope they did a TV movie miniseries sequel to Gone with the Wind, but they had the good sense not to remake Gone with the Wind. I hope they will do that with Titanic as well. But I would say that unless I'm missing something, Kindred Spirits is the first gay story from Titanic to get, dramatization. And I'm proud of that. It's a voice that was missing, I think.
Right.
So,
and I think you make a great point that we don't maybe necessarily realize that it's very, very, very likely that there were passengers on there who were gay. And
they used to call us the 10%. I guarantee you we're more than 10%. But back when people first started talking about it, they were like, oh, at least 10% of the population is gay. But wait, there was going to be another brilliant point I was about to make. It's gone out the window. It'll come back to me, I hope.
It's gone with the wind.
Yeah, it's gone with the wind.
But no, like that is great that even, it's 113 years, since then. But like you just said, that this is probably the very first, even though it, has fiction involved, there is a representation for something that very likely could have had, the subject matter that you are presenting.
It came back to me what I was going to say on that very point. in the book, because I was very careful about in piecing together the mystery of what happened to Jack Thayer, just for Milton to get some closure. But part of the story, and I won't spoil it for anyone about to read the book, but survivor Jack wrote a letter to Milton's parents to give them comfort, hoping to give them comfort, knowing that their son met his end with bravery, and that he was not alone, that Jack was with him. And that letter exists, and I write it in the book, I include it in the book, word for word, the letter from Jack to Milton's parents. And Jack asked for a photograph of Milton as a keepsake. This is a guy that he met for one night. They didn't know each other the first few days of the journey. Jack solicited a friendship with Milton because Milton was just, by all accounts, introverted, shy, quiet, this way. And Jack was 17. Milton was 29. Jack initiated this friendship that got very hot very fast, to the point of where they went down with the ship together. So in this letter, Jack enclosed a photograph of himself to Milton's parents, saying, I thought you would like to see who was with your son at the end. And would you do me the courtesy of sending me back a photo of Milton? Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I can read between the lines enough to know that that's a love letter. I'm goosebumps talking about it, because that's very romantic to me, and it says a lot. And maybe it's some sort of courtly, gentlemanly love, if you don't want to believe that it's gay. But it's touching. It's undeniably touching, especially when you know that Milton was an only child, and his body was recovered and returned to his parents in Massachusetts. And the family plot, you can still visit it today, was for 8 people, and only 3 are buried there: Mr. Judge and Mrs. Long and Milton. And to me, that says they were expecting either to have more children, which never happened, or that Milton would go on to marry and have children of his own, and they would all be in the Long family plot together. And it just makes me sad that's the way it ended. I mean, there's a million sad stories out there. This is just another one. So I'm trying to give it a reinvented happy ending.
Hey, there you go. And is there, speaking of descendants and speaking of descendants upon descendants, are you aware of anybody within Milton's family that?
Not in Milton's family. And with Jack's, Jack went on to marry and have 4 children. And as I said, Jack and I both are from Philadelphia. So I was combing through Philadelphia archives, and it seemed like everybody had died off. I'd gotten sort of as far as I could go, and I was out to dinner at the Players Club here in New York City with a fellow author. And I was telling him about the book, and he was asking very much the same question. And he's like, oh, Jack Thayer? I'm very good friends with his granddaughter. I'm like, how old is she? And she's like in her late 80s. And I was like, okay, so there's one Thayer still out there. But but she's very old, and I don't know that she has children. So there's still the Thayer line went on. The Long family, to the best of my knowledge, did not go on.
Wow. That's kind of when you stop and think about just that idea that in 113 years, and a family, like a line, more than likely is gone. That's kind of I don't know, just hearing you say that
does not escape me. That does not escape me, because I am the only son of Nelson Aspen. I'm Nelson Aspen Jr., and the Aspen line ends with me.
It ends with you.
So there are many parallels. There have been parallels with my life and Milton's life from my childhood. Recurring dream. I grew up in a big old farmhouse with a banister, and we'd always slide down the banister. Never ran down the stairs. We always slid down the banister. But I would have a recurring dream that I still have on occasion, where I would be sliding on a banister, But instead of getting off at the bottom, I just kept going into the blackness. I mean, that doesn't seem like a weird dream, although I had it often and I chalked it up to childhood until I read a book in the early 80s by Wynne Craig Wade. It was new Titanic book at the time. I forget what it was called, but it was by Wynne. I'll never forget the author's name, Wynne Craig Wade. And in those days, you had to go to a library or a bookstore to read a book. So I was in a bookstore at the South Street Seaport, and I found this book, and it was the first time I saw Milton's name. I knew about the friend of Jack Thayer's, but he was named Milton, and I've been called Milton inadvertently, not just by Dr. Ballard, but people have been mistakenly calling me Milton my entire life. But Wynne Craig Wade was describing Milton's death. Jack was the stronger swimmer. Milton was not a strong swimmer. So Jack leapt from the ship to make a swim for it and survived. Milton, because of the angle of the ship, decided he would straddle the railing and slide down and then swim out from the water. And the author described that Milton mounted the railing like a banister. And it was just another one of those light bulb moments for me. And in my dream, I just kept going into the blackness. For Milton, he just kept going under the black water. So,
Right. Well, look, this was before we kind of wrap it up here. I do want to, because there's a little nugget of your filmography credit, whatever your career.
All right, I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna write it down and see if I'm guessing what you're gonna say correctly.
Yeah,
and then
go ahead.
All right. Go ahead.
You got it?
Yeah.
All right. Living with Leo.
I thought you were going to say Ishtar.
No, Living with Leo.
I have the distinction of being in the most notoriously worst movie ever made.
I've never heard of Ishtar.
It's not so bad. Warren Beatty, Dustin Hoffman, and Nelson Aspen for 3 seconds. But yeah, I actually had an interview with Warren Beatty and was saying, we were in Ishtar together. It's not so bad. He's like, I love that film. No, Hangin' with Leo is what.
Oh, okay. Hangin' with Leo.
And it's 29 minutes long. It's a documentary. And you can watch it on YouTube. Just type in Hangin' with an N and an apostrophe, Hangin' with Leo, which is also one of the worst things ever. Have you watched it?
No.
Okay, so when we're finished here, you must immediately go on YouTube, and if you can bear to get through the 29 minutes of Hangin' with Leo, I am one of the hosts. I think it was 1999, but it was capitalizing on his heartthrob status, and it was one of those VHSs that they would sell in supermarkets, for $6.99. But it was targeted to teenage girls, and it's about what a dreamboat Leonardo DiCaprio is, and it has paparazzi footage of him on the beach and coming out of nightclubs and being silly and goofy. And I'm talking about this, and it sold. I mean, they paid me a day fee, but it sold like crazy. It was a huge best-selling video, but it haunts me to this day because it's so awful. And it's so badly done. But I've interviewed Leo like 4 or 5 times, and there were a series of Christmases where I spent Christmas with his mother Ermeline. We had mutual friends, and we all spent Christmases together. And so it was like, I'm the guy from Hangin' with Leo, and it shows you what a good sport Leo is, because he thought it was hilarious. And I was interviewing him. I think it was Shutter Island. I was interviewing him for Shutter Island, and I brought him a VHS, still shrink wrapped in the cellophane, never opened, of Hangin' with Leo. And he was so excited. It was the best gift I could have gotten him. But that's what I talk about when I say you can't take criticism badly, because when the internet came out, someone found Hangin' with Leo, and there's some website or something called Everything is Terrible. And they featured Hangin' with Leo. There was a whole episode devoted to how terrible that documentary is. So you have to embrace these things. Like, that's why Faye Dunaway should really get on the wagon and embrace Mommy Dearest.
Is hanging with Leo considered terrible because of just what the subject matter is? Just like
You
kind of
tell me.
stalking
It's
him?
terrible on so many levels. I don't know where to begin.
No,
But
no,
that
because
wasn't the point. The point was to target teenage girls with Dreamboat Leo, which he was in 1999, undeniably. And it's just content. Now you'd get that on Instagram, but we didn't
right.
have Instagram in 1999. It's 29 minutes of video footage.
It's 29 minutes of TMZ.
Yeah, and commentary by myself, and she was a gossip reporter for Star Magazine, Janet Charlton. She was a legend back then, and she and I do all the commentary. And there's some like giggly teenage girl who does the voiceover throughout the whole thing. Oh, it's something. I think that should be my legacy. That's what they put on my tombstone. He was hanging with Leo.
He hung with Leo. Oh, did you actually hang with Leo?
No, as I said, I've
Interviewed
interviewed
him.
him a bunch of times. I hung with Ermeline, his mother.
Okay. That's so funny. That's so weird that's yeah, because the very first time I heard you like even remotely talk about this or even that this existed was on, I think, Titanic Talk, right? This got brought up at some point.
We were talking to the guy who collects all the Titanic on VHS. So
Yes,
I'm like,
yeah.
speaking of VHS,
Right,
I bet
right.
you don't have Hanging with Leo.
Right. That's when I
probably
first
sold
heard
those on eBay too.
Yeah, that's when I first heard it. So I was like, what is this thing? So I do want to check it out just to kind of,
Well, it won't cost you a cent. It's definitely on YouTube.
But wow. So you don't get any residuals from that?
Oh, no. That was literally, they came over to my house in LA for 2 hours and they're like, all right, now I'll talk about this. Now I'll talk about that. Now, I made everything sound so exciting and Leo.
Wow. And it was probably a kind of a weird connection, right? Because of your thing with Alexandra, and here I am doing something again, a kind of associated because it's Leo.
I don't know if Alexandra was even, she would have been living in, I was in my house, so she was living in my rented house. But I was doing a lot of that stuff. There were shows called Inside Edition, which is still on. Inside Edition, Hard Copy, American Journal. There were a lot of these shows pre-TMZ. They were these nightly half-hour shows. That was all celebrity gossip and news. And I did a lot of that. I was a regular, they pigeonhole you. I was the Leo DiCaprio guy. I was the Keanu Reeves guy. I was the Hugh Grant guy, because I had done a story for a magazine on Hugh Grant's love life. And when he got arrested having oral sex in a car outside of my house, and it made news that and the mugshot of Hugh Grant with Divine Brown, the sex worker, all of a sudden I became the sought after Hugh Grant guy. So it's funny how this is when you say yes to everything. I was trying to carve out a television career. So right. At least if I'm going to offer commentary, I did it in a responsible way. I mean, I was very careful about what I said and how I said it, and I knew my audience. So if they want to talk about it like this, you talk about it like this. It doesn't mean you're any less responsible. And now I think it's funny because now I'm a political commentator. I don't know when this will be airing, but as we are recording this, it is the day of the Pope's funeral. And I was up at 3 a.m. to do political commentary on the fact that Donald Trump and First Lady were at the funeral. So every now and then people will say, he's an entertainment reporter. What's he doing political commentary? And I was like, well, it's really not that much different. If you're a good journalist, commentary is commentary. You just have a different, and really politicians aren't much different than celebrities. It's just a different venue, but it's really the same. Famous people are famous people. It doesn't really matter. And I'm having a heck of a good time doing political commentary because it's different. And I can do two things at once. I can chew gum and I can walk, and I can be an entertainment reporter and offer political commentary. So there.
All right. Well, we can't we can't end this on hanging with Leo. So I just had to make sure I mentioned it because it is this bizarre kind of thing that I know exists in your career.
I hope you and all your listeners will reach out after watching Hanging with Leo. And if you're going to go from the sublime to the ridiculous, so if you're going to do one, Hanging with Leo being the ridiculous, I hope everybody will also check out Kindred Spirits, A Titanic Tale. That is, to me, will be the sublime.
There you go. And so to end this, because I know you had to hop off at some point during the Titanic roundtable, so you didn't make it to the very end. And I think I asked you the question, but I never included it in the episode. So I'm going to ask it to you now that I have you here.
It rings a bell.
Every guest that's a new guest, even though you're not new, but you didn't get the question. What's your all-time favorite Cameron film? Put aside any association of Titanic, but if it is, just make sure it's not because you are kind of associated to Titanic.
Yeah, I mean, it would be Titanic because of my love for all things Titanic. I did pay to see it in the cinema 8 times. I don't think, other than the Poseidon Adventure, I don't think I ever paid to see a movie multiple times, other than Poseidon Adventure, Mommy Dearest, probably, it was college, and Titanic. That said, I would give a shout out to True Lies because I love that film.
True Lies. That's a rare mention here on the.
Yeah,
on the
I know. I just think it's a great popcorn film. It's just sheer entertainment, perfect casting, and I haven't seen it in years, but that comes to mind. I loved it. I remember loving it. Maybe it doesn't stand up. I'll have to watch it again.
And really quickly, what do you think of the remake of Poseidon from Wolfgang Peterson?
Well, don't get me started, because first there was the TV remake with C. Thomas Howell and Rutger Hauer, a TV miniseries, which was abominable. And then I had high hopes for Wolfgang Peterson, because of all directors, Wolfgang Peterson should be doing ship stories. And I was encouraged because he said he wanted the ship to be a character in the film. And I did the press junket for that film. And Richard Dreyfuss, get this, he played a gay middle-aged bachelor named Nelson. So I enjoyed interviewing Richard and going, yeah, well, you're playing, what about this? And the film was very disappointing, and I was very good friends with the original Poseidon cast, specifically Carol Lindley, Pamela Sue Martin, Stella Stevens, Roddy McDowall, and Stella. Stella didn't participate in the remake, but Carol Lindley and Red Buttons and Pamela Sue, they went to the premiere, they were supportive of it, but it doesn't compare. The special effects are great, but there's no, I don't know, it doesn't pull at your gut the way the original does.
So it's safe to say Gene Hackman's passing was kind of hard.
Very sad, although I have to say, his castmates, I never met Gene, but I met almost all of his Poseidon castmates. And an interesting story was that Gene won the Oscar for French Connection while he was shooting Poseidon. And he was not the first casting choice for Poseidon. I can't remember who was offered it first. They didn't take it. They got Gene, and I don't think Gene was that happy with it, and he didn't really want to be an action star. And then his brother was a stuntman, so he wanted to do stunts. If he was going to do it, he wanted to do his own stunts, and they would only let him do so many. But when he won the Oscar, they brought him a cake on the set, and Shelley Winters, Ernest Borgnine, Jack Albertson, and Red Buttons, who all were themselves Oscar winners, brought their Oscars in that day. Ronald Neame, the director, had been nominated for an Oscar, and they had a cake to congratulate him, and they did a whole thing on the set. But I remember from my friend Carol Lindley saying that after he won the Oscar, he really was inconsolable. He just didn't want to be doing Poseidon Adventure. He didn't feel like it was showing him at his best, which you could argue it does or doesn't. I was a little troubled at his passing when everybody was remembering Poseidon Adventures when he passed, but people were saying about how funny it was, and it's camp by today's standards, but it was certainly not a comedy. It didn't mean that Shelley Winters and Stella Stevens didn't have some zingers, but it's certainly not a comedy.
Right. Yeah, it definitely was sad. But anyways, we could keep going and going and going here. So I just kind of want to keep it because we're about an hour 15 here.
Oh, okay. See, and I was worried I wouldn't have enough to talk about.
Yeah, you were like, so like, when can I expect this to end?
Hey, it's almost happy hour. Perfect timing.
Everybody, please, I'll make sure I have the link in the show notes. If you are interested in the book from our discussion here today, go support Nelson. And if you have the chance, if you are lucky enough to live in New York City or one of the stops he's going to be making along the way, Boston, Hong Kong.
I get around. I'm a frequent flyer.
Seriously, yeah, you must have insane miles.
Yeah, but you know what?
Rewards.
My Instagram, the website, anywhere Nelson Aspen is, everything's on there. I'm really the easiest person to find.
There you go. So go support the book. It's like he said, it's probably, without even realizing it, a monumental thing that you did, just to give representation to a section of humanity that wasn't represented a whole lot, if at all, back in 1912. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for sticking around for a whole episode.
Oh, hey, thank you for your hospitality. I'm grateful and I appreciate it. And you're so smart, and you're also a very personable person.
Hey, there we go. All right. We'll do a formal goodbye. So just stick around. I'll end the recording here. Everybody, go watch a James Cameron film.